Hello, wonderful people. I hope you're having a fantastic day. It is hot. It is hot here, but it is beautiful. And the skies, oh, they look free of chemtrails, so it's a good day. 3 wars. We're going to talk about the 3 wars that the United States government system is involved in right now. First one is the Ukraine proxy war against Russia. Second one, the Iranian war. And the third one, well, that information came to us from NASA's website. And that's the silent war the United States government system has waged upon American citizens. 3 wars. I hope you enjoy the show. I thought it was time to do a video really explaining in detail exactly why America is involved in at least two foreign wars currently. There's the Ukraine-Russian war, and of course the war with Iran. A lot of people don't seem to understand that Ukraine is a proxy. It's a U.S. proxy. Vladimir Zelensky was an actor. He was an actor playing the role of president on TV, and then he became president of Ukraine. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Russia came out with a report, June 1st, 2023. The outcome report of the Parliamentary Commission on Investigation into the Circumstances Related to Creation of Biological Laboratories by U.S. Specialists on the territory of Ukraine. They presented this information to the UN, but the UN is corrupt, so they ignored them. Russia declared war with the Ukraine, I believe, in part to prevent another pandemic. Moscow, 2023. Contents, Introduction, Chapter 1, Creating Global Biological Threats by the United States. Now, what's really interesting, too, regarding the Hanta virus, they believe it came from Argentina.
Well, if it is a pandemic, let's just look at the likely
$40 billion
bad actors involved.
And in
okay, so we know that there are 2 biolabs here.
A biolab level 4, and one of the many viruses that they
Chile, Argentina report rise in deadly hantavirus cases May 7, 2026.
And if you look at the region,
so far in 2026, Chile has confirmed 39 hantavirus.
It is located, you'll see that in that same region there has been an uptick in the hantavirus since October 2025. I don't believe in coincidences. I'm not saying that I'm 100% right. I'm just delivering the facts to you. Yeah. Don't you wonder how many biolabs the U.S. has around the world? I certainly do. U.S. Biological Weapons Program. Transformation of U.S. approaches to biological weapons. Modernization of the facilities that previously served for military biological issues. Modern biological research areas in the United States. Ongoing military-related applied projects. Changing of tactics for dual-use biological research. Model of implementation of Pentagon medical and biological activities outside the national territory. U.S. compliance with safety measures in biological research. Establishing the U.S. Global Biological Intelligence System under the guise of scientific research conducted for peaceful purposes. Chapter 2. Medical and biological activities of Pentagon in Ukraine as an integral part of the U.S. military biological program. And not only did Joe Biden admit on camera that he helped with the regime change in the Ukraine, but we also had Brian Fitzpatrick going over there at the same time. Now, he is FBI, now head of the CIA Intel Committee, and he's also on the NATO Parliamentary Committee. So 1. Agreements of cooperation between Ukraine and the United States in the biological sphere. 2. U.S. constructing new biological laboratories in Ukraine and modernizing existing ones. Areas of biological research, ongoing military-related applied projects. The impact by the United States on the epidemiological situation in Ukraine. The impact by the United States on the epidemiological situation in Ukraine. Training of Ukrainian specialists by the United States. I wonder who did the training. I wonder if it was an FBI agent, somebody that works for the Department of Defense. Maybe somebody that likes to sign artillery shells with warnings on them to Putin. Outbreaks of infectious diseases in Ukraine. Medical experiments on humans. Act of biological terrorism against Slavianosserbsk district residents of Lugansk People's Republic. Chapter 3. International legal assessment of biomedical activities of the United States in Ukraine. International legal regime related to the prohibition of biological weapons. Efforts of the Russian Federation to strengthen the BTWC regime. National legislation of Ukraine and the United States in the area of military, biological, research and development, and its compliance with the BTWC. Assessment of activities of biological laboratories in the territory of Ukraine in the context of fulfillment by the United States and Ukraine of their international obligations and signs of violations of international humanitarian law by the United States and Ukraine. Chapter 4. Readiness of the biological safety system of the Russian Federation to adequately respond to new biological challenges and threats. 1. Strategic and legal framework for ensuring biological safety in the Russian Federation. Framework of state authorities in the area of biological safety. Russian system for monitoring external biological threats. Export of biomaterials and protection of genetic data. Export control over the import and export of especially dangerous pathogens, strengthening measures. Response framework of the Russian Federation to external biological threats, and international cooperation. Chapter 5, Conclusions of the Commission. Chapter 6, Proposals for strengthening the biological safety system of the Russian Federation and the BTWC regime. Introduction. In accordance with the resolution of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation dated March 22, 2022, number 960-8 GD, and the resolution of the Federation Council of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation dated March 23, 2022, number 102-SF. A parliamentary commission was established to investigate the circumstances related to establishment of biological laboratories by U.S. specialists in Ukraine, hereinafter referred to as the Commission. Activities of the Commission have been carried out in accordance with the Constitution of the Russian Federation, federal constitutional laws, federal law dated December 27, 2005, number 196-FZ. Quote, on parliamentary investigation of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, end quote, other federal laws and other regulatory legal acts of the Russian Federation. Grounds for conducting the parliamentary investigation were facts and circumstances related to medical and biological programs implemented by the United States in Ukraine, which became known to the Parliament of the Russian Federation. The Commission based its work on available materials relating to the subject matter of the investigation, information obtained during speeches of heads of federal executive bodies, like the one by Joe Biden, and specialized scientific institutions, documents seized in the course of a special military operation, results of surveys of specialists, experts with the required information, including persons who directly worked in Ukrainian territory. During the investigation, members of the commission assessed the transformation of U.S. approaches to biological weapons. In this context, particular attention has been paid to the study of the U.S. military biological capacity, including the analysis of information provided by the states parties to the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, and Stockpiling of Bacteriological, Biological, and Toxin Weapons, and on their destruction, hereinafter referred to as the BTWC. On an annual basis as part of its confidence-building measures and materials of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, hereinafter referred to as DTRA. The main purpose of the parliamentary investigation was to identify the causes and conditions for the establishment by U.S. specialists of biological laboratories in the territory of Ukraine, to inform Russian society about them, to assist federal executive bodies in eliminating such causes and conditions, and consequently to protect human and civil rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution of the Russian Federation, including the rights of citizens of the Russian Federation to health and favorable environment. That's not something that we have here in America. American citizens no longer have the right to health and favorable environment. And for some reason, Americans believe that Russia is just this godforsaken nation that is the biggest threat to humanity on the globe. Why? Why do we think that? Well, because people like Hillary Clinton have been saying it for years. I've been saying it for years. I guess after a while, for some reason, a lot of Americans will believe whatever they're told by politicians, and celebrities for that matter. Recommendations and proposals formulated on the basis of the investigation outcomes can be used by federal government bodies in making decisions in the field of ensuring biological safety and drafting new initiatives of the Russian Federation to develop international cooperation in this area, strengthen the BTWC regime conforming to current biological threats. Chapter 1. Creating Global Biological Threats by the United States. U.S. Biological Weapons Program. The U.S. Biological Weapons Program was launched in 1942 through 1943 with the establishment of a special military research service within the Department of Defense. In 1944, now think about these years, friends. What happened in 1944? They formed the State of Israel. What happened 42 and 43? Well, Meyer Lansky had ensnared Hoover in a homosexual tryst, blackmailed him, and was able to start smuggling weapons to the new State of Israel. In 1944, responsibility for its implementation was assigned to the Chemical Weapons Service of the U.S. Department of the Army. Now remember, we already had those Nazi scientists flown over from Operation Paperclip. I'm sure they had a lot to do with this, I'm sure. Because as it was discovered during the war, the Nazis weren't just slaughtering the Jews. They were experimenting on them to figure out how to, find the best forms of mind control. They were using all kinds of biological weapons and toxins. And then they brought all their formulas over here and worked with our scientists to create new ones. This has been going on for a long time. As part of the implementation of the program, a complex of research laboratories in Fort Detrick, Maryland, and I believe that's where they released the anthrax from, isn't it? Remember that? It was reported that a few viruses went missing from there. I remember researching this a long time ago. Everything so far is checking out. A large test site in Dugway, Utah, which I'm not even familiar with, enterprises for the production and storage of combat biological formulations in Pine Bluff, Arizona, and Utah and Arizona. The corruption, the Freemasonry, the Mormonism, and now the Vatican, as well as other specialized enterprises were constructed. In 1945, the CIA conducted a secret operation Paperclip, aimed at identifying and resettling in the United States of German and Japanese experts in the area of biological weapons. And here I thought it was just Germans. Hereinafter, this is called the BW. These war criminals, who had conducted monstrous biological experiments on humans and were backed not only by the Vatican, but by the United States government via the Bushes and others, received judicial immunity from the U.S. authorities in exchange for their participation in secret U.S. military biological projects. And this should be well known by all Americans because these documents, they're public. By the late 1960s, the United States already had a military biological arsenal aimed at not only killing humans, but also at destroying crops, which included numerous pathogenic bacteria, toxins, fungi, and plant parasites. By this time, biological warfare formulations based on causative agents of anthrax, tularemia, plague, yellow fever, brucellosis, psittacosis, Q fever, no, not QAnon, that's a different type of Q fever, and equine encephalomyelitis were taken into service. Means of delivery of biological warfare formulations have been developed. Several versions of small caliber spherical and cylindrical bombs, specially designed cassettes and devices for spraying biological agents, including aircraft discharge devices. Might be a clean air day today. I'm not seeing any lines in the sky where I am. In the course of preparation for the use of biological weapons during the Korean War, 50 to 53, and by the way, that was the deadliest war as far as the ratio goes. Of course, the numbers were higher in the world wars, but there were I believe it was one in every 15 died, where in Korea it was 1 in every 13. Korea was horrible. My grandfather came back from Korea a completely different human being. He came back an evil man. The U.S. Department of Defense purchased a large number of biological air-delivered munitions. A test site located in Canada was used for their testing, and a concept for their application was developed. Causative agents of brucellosis and economically significant infections, in particular wheat stem rust, were considered as biological agents. The United States planned to use 2,500 munitions filled with them, including in the territory of the Soviet Union. In 1969, the United States officially announced the cessation of implementation of the military biological program. Nevertheless, Washington did not stop research in the area of development and possible use of biological combative agents, hereinafter referred to as BCA, but continued such research under the pretext of strengthening biological safety and combating bioterrorism. For example, the memorandum of the U.S. National Security Council states U.S. programs in the area of bacteriological, biological weapons will be limited to research and development for protection purposes. This does not mean abandoning studies of the possibilities of military use of bacteriological and biological agents necessary to determine the required protective measures. In this context, it should be noted that the United States, after announcing the termination of implementation of the offensive military biological program, have retained its potential for the production of BW. Specifically, Russian experts, in the course of visiting U.S. biological facilities held under the trilateral agreement between Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom in February through March 1999, revealed that a former Pfizer company biological weapons production plant, Terre Haute, Indiana, technological equipment previously intended for the production of military biological formulations was not only preserved, but even upgraded. At the same time, equipment and technological lines for growing, concentrating, drying, and packaging biological agents were maintained in working order. It was also uncovered that there were still technical possibilities for processing pathogens of dangerous infectious human and animal diseases in the enterprise facilities. 1.2. Transformation of U.S. approaches to biological weapons. After several years since the U.S. statement on the refusal to develop biological weapons, U.S. specialized professionals have again begun to show interest in this type of weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, representatives of the United States political, are you talking about Brian Fitzpatrick? I don't know, it doesn't say. And military decision makers started to make statements about the advisability of revising the approach to BW. Specifically in August 1986, Douglas Feith, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, speaking before the House of Representatives Committee on Intelligence of the U.S. Congress, declared that the Pentagon had changed its opinion on the value of biological weapons from the military perspective, and the BTWC should be recognized as imperfect and ambiguous. In September 2000, the influential U.S. NGO Project for the New American Century, which was active in the U.S. from 1997 to 2006 and influenced the ideology and military policy of President George Bush Jr. administration, stated in one of its policy documents as follows, and I quote, "In the 21st century, new methods of aggression will spread, electronic, non-lethal, biological. The struggle is likely to move into new dimensions, into space, cyberspace, and maybe into the world of microorganisms." And now we have the Hydra vulgaris that has been found in the COVID vaccines. End quote. Moreover, and I quote, "Advanced biological weapons capable of affecting a specific genotype can transform bioweapons from terrorist means into useful policy tools." End quote. The position of this organization was supported by many conservatives and members of the future Republican government of the United States. According to a number of foreign experts, the extensive media coverage of the incident in the United States with the spread of anthrax spores by mail in the fall of 2001 was organized by U.S. intelligence agencies on instructions of the U.S. government. As a result of such action, the civil society demanded U.S. administration and Congress to take decisive steps in countering the biological threat. The Pentagon, which sought a significant increase in spending on quote-unquote protective biological programs and the corresponding reform of the National Biological Safety System, was also interested in this development. As a result, the United States was forced to admit that such letters were mailed by an employee who worked at one of the United States Department of Defense specialized facilities. It's amazing that we have to go to Russia for this information, isn't it? In October 2001, George W. Bush Jr. signed a special directive on Homeland Security. Homeland Security Presidential Directive, which provided for the intensification of the development and testing of new, especially dangerous, pathogentic microorganisms, as well as creation of technologies for their production. It was planned to create genetically modified pathogens with high resistance to existing medicines, improve methods for increasing their virulence and resistance to the environment, as well as to examine ways to convert them to an aerosol state. And cue the planes. These are your chemtrails, friends. You can thank George W. Bush for that. I mean, the Bush dynasty, they're probably the biggest Nazis in America, the biggest drug lords, the biggest traffickers. In particular, a laboratory of the St. Louis University conducted experiments related to modification of the cowpox virus in order to make it dangerous to humans. According to official statements, such experiments were carried out in order to develop countermeasures against terrorist attacks, which could be carried out by means of modified bioagents. It was assumed that the research would include field tests with both simulants of biological agents and real pathogens at the Lothar Solomon Life Sciences Test Facility, LSTF, which was additionally equipped for this purpose with 4 modular biological laboratories with a high level of biological safety. Friends, this page, I think I just ended with, was 4. That was 4 pages. This report is 59 pages long. Ukraine is our proxy. We're at war with Russia. The United States has given the Ukraine over $100 billion in aid. $100 billion. Obama appointed Biden to oversee the regime change. Biden employed his son to give him a hand. Hunter has been tied to not only Burisma, but also to these biolabs. Now, I think we all know that Hunter Biden and, well, his father, they're not the brightest. In fact, it recently came out in a hearing with Tim Walz that Obama appointed Biden specifically because he would never outshine Obama in any capacity whatsoever. Biden did the same with Harris. Harris did the same with Walz. This was stated in a congressional hearing. So yeah, Biden needed help. And I believe that's why they sent Brian Fitzpatrick over there, because he was FBI. He's also on NATO's Parliamentary Commission, works closely with Mark Rutte, the director of NATO, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against children, SRA, and murder, along with Donald Trump and others in the Nice Circle cult, which I have covered extensively in previous videos, and I just keep reiterating because people still don't know, because as far as I can tell, myself, Sean Atwood, and Professor Hamamoto are the only ones who are covering the fact that the International Criminal Court found Donald Trump guilty of these crimes, sentenced him to life in prison, and put a $10,000 reward out for his arrest, for all of their arrests. So Brian Fitzpatrick is also CIA Intel, the head of CIA Intel Committee. So yeah, I believe Brian Fitzpatrick not only helped with the regime change in the Ukraine, but also helped with these biological labs and this pandemic. And it was discovered by Russia, who blew the whistle, but couldn't get any help because everybody is complicit apparently. NATO, the UN, WHO, all of these global organizations, they're all complicit in these crimes against humanity, as far as I can tell, from all of these documents, and not just Russian documents, our own documents. $100 billion plus. And Brian Fitzpatrick, he just asked for more. He just asked for more money to Ukraine. You think it's going to get approved? I can pretty much guarantee it will. And this war with Iran, you know that they don't have weapons of mass destruction, right? You know that they're not building nuclear weapons. And Tulsi Gabbard told us they're not building nuclear weapons. That's not why we went to war. We went to war over the petrodollar. And the petrodollar is a Ponzi scheme. I don't know when America died. I don't. As far as I can tell, this predates Nixon. It might go all the way back to the Civil War because guess what? Lincoln was a globalist. He was working on behalf of the globalists. He didn't free the slaves. In fact, Lincoln wanted to ship the slaves down to the West Indies, you know, where they sent the Irish slaves, because he just didn't want to deal with them anymore. But instead, he used them to fight the bloodiest war in the Western Hemisphere to this date. Did you know the Emancipation Proclamation was written 2 years into the Civil War? Do you know why it was written 2 years and not like at the onset? Because Lincoln and the globalists were losing. Our brothers and sisters in the South, they were winning. Under the command of General Lee, who Lincoln had asked to lead the Union Army. But Lee wasn't a traitor to his country or his family. So he said no, and he led the South. You guys, the South were the good guys. All of this corruption, this might go back to Lincoln. That truth is one that I have been screaming from the rooftops about for years. People are so brainwashed that they just can't accept the truth. You know, the victors write the history, right? Could you imagine if the Nazis won? Or wait, I guess they kind of did in a way, didn't they? Well, I think the following video might help shed a little bit more light on the topic. And then after the video, I'm going to continue to read a little bit more of the special report. I want to get into an assassination of a Russian researcher. And I also want to talk about a PowerPoint presentation that NASA put on their website that details the silent war that the U.S. government has waged against American citizens that we're actually in currently. I hope you enjoy the video and stick around for more details at the end. Friends, I can't vouch for the diary of a CEO. I mean, they seem to have really important information, but I don't know if they're part of the Department of Defense or not. What I do know is that Professor Jiang is very likable. And he's been right about everything so far. So I think that we really should take a listen to what he has to say.
Problem. These are very In 2024, you made 3 predictions that have come perfectly true, like Trump would start a war with Iran. And you've made a series of new predictions.
Yes, and I'll explain each prediction one by one. Okay, so first, I predict that Trump will get a 3rd term.
But isn't this constitutionally illegal?
It's not. The president now has emergency war powers, and so he could actually delay the election. My 2nd prediction is Iran is another forever war, and the United States will institute a national draft, meaning that if you're between 18 to 24 in America and you're male, you'll be automatically put into the draft system. And they just passed a law that says that starting in December, you will be automatically registered.
Which means you're blind.
Oh my gosh. What did I say? I said it's going to go down in December because we're going to wait for that stupid Marvel movie. Oh, good Lord. Sorry to interrupt. No more.
To go and fight.
Exactly. Next, the world will move towards an AI surveillance state. So everything you do online is being recorded to figure out how to control you. And then this is the most controversial prediction. This is pretty bad. And I'll explain why. And also, I will tell you why this war can only lead to World War III. Why there's a very strong possibility that the American empire will collapse. And also, I'll show you what the Russians will do and how the private bankers are controlling you.
I'm not owned by anybody.
That's what you think.
So let's talk about that. This is super interesting to me. My team give me this report to show me how many of you that watch this show subscribe. Professor Dian, there's so much going on in the world at the moment that it's quite confusing for an ordinary person like me. And you've blown up across the internet because you've been able to demystify all of this craziness, but also because in 2024, you made 3 predictions that have come perfectly true. Some might say unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes.
What were those 3 predictions?
My first prediction was that Trump would win in November 2024. Second prediction is that he would start a war against Iran. And the third prediction is that the United States would lose this war. And in losing this war, this would radically reshape the geopolitical landscape.
How did you know that Trump would start a war with Iran?
The simple answer is this. The United States have invaded Iran because it has no choice in the matter. If it were not to invade Iran, it would lose its empire. Its empire is based purely on the US dollar, the petrodollar, which is a Ponzi scheme. If it did not invade Iran, then people would choose not to trade with it anymore. People would choose to not buy US treasuries.
Why?
For the longest time, this system worked fine. But then in February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay. That was not the issue. The issue was the American response. The American response was to sanction Russia and remove Russia from the SWIFT global payment system. It also ordered Europeans to freeze over $200 billion in Russian assets. And there's a problem because the very basis for having the US dollar as the global reserve currency is that it would remain politically neutral. The Americans guaranteed seamless, politically neutral international exchange. So if this trend continues, right, if you don't do anything about Russia, Russia would take over Ukraine. And Russia then would build an alliance with China and Iran. If you look at these 3 countries on the map, Russia, China, and Iran, this is the entire Asian continent. And then what they can do is this. They can say, okay, the United States is a bully. They force us to play by the rules. They get very angry if we don't play by the rules. So let's not play with the United States anymore. Let's just trade amongst ourselves. And then what they can do is they can build a Eurasian railway system connecting Russia, Iran, and China together. And then what this would do is negate American sea power because it's American ships that patrol and protect the oceans. And then what would happen is the world, Europe, Middle East, Africa, India, East Asia would look at this trading bloc and think to themselves, wow, these guys, the Russians, Iranians, and Chinese, they use gold as their medium of exchange. Gold is valuable. The Americans, on the other hand, use US dollars as the medium of exchange, which is not valuable. So am I better off with the American system or with this new BRICS system?
What's BRICS?
It's an acronym. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, China.
So am I right in thinking, because Iran, Russia, and China were colluding, it threatened US dominance, which is driven by the world using the dollar as the primary currency for trading?
That's correct.
Okay, so they felt they needed to invade because then they can control more of the Middle East?
Right. So by attacking Iran, certain things happen. Okay? The first thing that happened is that China is now cut off from Middle East energy. China receives anywhere between 50 to 6% of its energy needs from the Middle East. Not just Iran, but also Qatar and Saudi Arabia. A lot of people say that China today, it's reliant on renewables, solar, wind, and that's true to a certain extent. But remember that China, it is an industrial powerhouse. So it needs energy from everywhere and everyone. So the fact that China is losing all this energy from the Middle East presents China with a long-term strategic vulnerability. And that's the first thing that happens. Second thing that happens is that Europe is in a lot of trouble. Because remember, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russian energy was sanctioned. And so Europe relied more on the Middle East for its energy needs, especially Qatar. And now Europe has lost all of this oil. And then you have Japan and South Korea. These two powerful East Asian economies are also reliant on the Middle East for its energy. So now the question is, if you're not getting your energy from the Middle East, where can you get your energy from? And there's only two answers, either Russia or the United States. Russia is at war. And what's happening is the Ukrainian drones are attacking Russian oil refineries and export hubs. So the world in the short term has no choice but to look to America for its energy needs. And what did Trump do recently? He took over Venezuela, which has the world's greatest oil reserves. He's threatening Canada. He's threatening Greenland, Mexico, Colombia. If Trump controls the entire Western Hemisphere, the entire world has to beg Trump for energy and resources. And this saves both the US dollar as well as the American empire.
So as part of your prediction in 2024, I believe it was, you said that the US would lose this war.
Right.
Why did you predict that the US will lose this war with Iran?
Because the American society does not have the political will, does not have the manufacturing capacity, and does not have the risk tolerance to fight this war in Iran. Basically, America wants to fight this war as cheaply, as easily, and as quickly as possible, right? So Trump really thought that, if I sent my airplanes to strike Tehran and kill the Ayatollah, they would just surrender. That was literally his plan going into this war. He paid no attention to the culture. He paid no attention to the history of the Iranian people. He had absolutely no respect for the nation. And when you do that, when you disrespect your opponent, when you underestimate your opponent, and when you yourself are not willing to commit to the fight, you're going to lose.
So is Iran's game just to draw this out as long as they possibly can? How are they, because he's taken out the leaders. And then do you also think that Trump thought that if I just bomb the leader, then everything will sort of regenerate itself and we'll be fine? What was the sort of fundamental misunderstanding?
There's a lot of confusion as to how this war started. Even today, no one actually knows how this war started. But I think that Trump, given his personality, he was convinced that if he killed the leadership of Iran, then they would have no choice but to surrender. And his proof of concept was, of course, on January 3rd of this year, Delta Force went into Venezuela, kidnapped Maduro, and they completely surrendered. So in Trump's mind, he wanted to replay the Venezuela scenario.
And he didn't realize that Iran is fundamentally different from Venezuela.
The short answer is he is a reality TV star. He thinks in terms of optics. He doesn't think in terms of like geopolitical strategy. The long answer is that the American military has become a very corrupt and insular institution that is trying to generate as much congressional funding as possible in order to fund the military-industrial complex.
Did he think that he was going to bomb Iran, the people would rise up, they would elect a new government, and that would be that, and then he could control Iran?
That's exactly what he thought. So what I want to do now is go to the map.
Okay.
All right?
Go ahead.
And show you what he got wrong.
Okay.
All right. So this is a map of the Middle East. And the first thing to notice about this map is the topography.
What does that mean?
How many mountains you have. So this is what's really interesting is that the topography between Iraq and Iran are completely different. And this is important because in 2003, the Americans invaded Iraq and they won the war in about 2 weeks. And the reason why they won the war is the Americans practiced something called shock and awe. And the idea of shock and awe is that it is a military strategy that believes that if you cut off the head of the snake will die. A decapitation strike. And so what they did was they went into Baghdad, seized Baghdad, and the regime collapsed and the war was over. And they were able to do this because of the topography. If you look at the map of Iraq, it's all flat, it's all desert, meaning that you can just fly in your planes, cut off the head of a snake, and the war is over. There's actually no way you can defend against airstrikes because you're entirely a desert. Now, let's look at topography of Iran. And Iran, it's all mountainous. In fact, you could make the argument that Iran is a fortress. Okay? And so the first thing is that Iran can choose to fight a war of attrition.
What's a war of attrition?
A war of attrition is a game of uncle.
What's that?
Right. A game of uncle is where we don't have enough power to destroy each other. So what we try to do is we try to create pain points, leverage points, to force you to submit, to cry uncle, right? So because Iran is too large, and that's 92 million people, it's impossible for the Americans and the Israelis to destroy Iran. So what you're trying to do instead is bomb enough targets so that they recognize that resistance is futile and is surrender. Okay? That's the extent of the strategy. But again, the problem with this is that one, Iran is much too big. Number two is that it is a mountain fortress, which means that you can hide your weapons and your military inside mountains, right? Which allows you to conduct a guerrilla warfare strategy against your opponent. And this is exactly what Iran is doing right now, where their underground missile bases are hidden inside the mountains, and then they're able to strike targets throughout the Middle East, primarily American bases, but also energy installations that are key to the American petrodollar system. And so it's a game of uncle where the Americans are trying to create as much damage as possible in the Iranian nation. And Iran, in response, is trying to destroy as much of the global economy as possible to force the world to pressure America to call the war off. So that's a situation we are facing right now. Second thing that Trump got wrong is how vulnerable the global economy is. Because the Iranians control something called the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? And as you can see on this map, the Strait of Hormuz, it's a very, very narrow piece of land. It's only about 33 kilometers across. You can actually swim across the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? And why this is important is the GCC exports 20% of the world's energy.
The G what?
The Gulf Cooperative Council. Okay, so the Gulf Cooperative Council are certain nations in the Middle East that align politically. So they include Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Oman, Iran, Kuwait. They've been exporting energy, but not just energy, but also a lot of byproducts of energy production, including fertilizer, to the world, primarily East Asia and India. In return, they've been getting food back. So most people don't appreciate this, but the GCC actually imports 89% of its food needs. And the reason why is that they've become so rich these past few decades that the populations have blown up. And as a result,
Now, we left off right after 2001, and the United States government under George W. Bush Jr. was able to convert these bioweapons into an aerosol state. And we also spoke of the Lothar Solomon Life Science Test Facility. As a result, biological projects at the U.S. Department of Defense have been significantly expanded, both in the volume of research conducted and in its focus. It was during this period that Pentagon structures conducted the planned distribution of strains of the anthrax pathogen to 192 laboratories located in 7 foreign states. The dispatch was carried out without prior notification of the relevant UN entities, the states parties to the BTWC, and governmental authorities of the recipient countries. Some samples contained live spores of the agent, which led to the infection of personnel of the target facilities. Such irresponsible actions posed a threat to biological safety in the world and required the most serious condemnation from the international community. The scope of relevant scientific activities has increased dramatically. Total annual allocations for federal biological defense programs reached U.S. $8 billion. The scale of the allocated funding provoked a construction boom. Associated with creation of laboratories with high, third BSL-3, and the maximum, like we see in Argentina, fourth BSL-4 biosafety levels. Since 2005, the availability of information about the U.S. Biological Defense Program has significantly decreased. Fragmentary information can be found only in media reports or public conference materials. At the same time, financing in this area is growing steadily. The technical work capacity with dangerous pathogens has also increased dramatically. The United States continues to include tasks to build up military biological capacity in its doctrinal documents. For example, on October 18, 2022, the White House published a new strategy to counter biological threats involving funding in the amount of US $88 billion, including $17 billion in the first year of implementation of the strategy, friends. So they're not putting all this money into building tunnels underground. They're putting hundreds and hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars into biological weapons for mass global genocide. One of the key focus areas of the strategy is the improvement of methods of individual and collective biological protection of the U.S. Armed Forces personnel in various theaters of military operations. The task is to continue studies of pathogens of highly dangerous infectious diseases endemic to specific areas. Therefore, the United States, within the framework of the strategy, intends to strengthen its system of global control and management of the global biological situation and reserves the right to conduct dual-use research, including outside the national territory. Another strategic planning document is DTRA's updated strategy until 2027, which openly recognizes the dual role of this military agency. This aspect concerns not only ensuring the defense of the country, but also combat support for military units in various regions of the world. Given that one of DTRA priorities is to ensure the military superiority of the U.S. Armed Forces over armed forces of a potential enemy, there is an emerging threat of development, production, and use of biological weapons. 1.3. Modernization of the facilities that previously worked on military biological issues. At the end of 2004, the United States decided to reorganize National Interagency Biodefense Campus, Biosecurity Research Complex located in Fort Detrick, Maryland. National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center was established on its premises. According to the plan, the center was intended to become the leading institution for studies of potential agents of biological weapons. It was planned that the center would be engaged in the development of genetically modified pathogens with high resistance to existing medicines. The improvement of technologies aimed at increasing their virulence and resistance to the environment, as well as research on methods for their conversion to an aerosol state. At the same time, the mission was set to develop reliable methods for the forensic identification of sources of microorganisms. To this end, it was planned to create a generalized database of foreign pathogens collected. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, located in Fort Detrick, has been focused on studies of causative agents of exotic diseases suitable for use as BCA. At the same time, NIAID employees received permission to conduct relevant experiments on animals, which had been forbidden to them in recent years. At the same time, the modernization of facilities previously active in the area of biological weapons has been carried out at an accelerated pace. In particular, U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases at Fort Detrick, Maryland, has undergone reconstruction. The facility was a crucial element of the U.S. military biological program from 1943 to 1969. After the construction, 2 labs of the 4th level of biological safety were opened on its premises. The Institute has become the main agency in the United States conducting virological, bacteriological, and genetic research. It studies mechanisms of the effect of pathogenic agents and explores ways to prevent or block the progress of diseases caused by them through the use of vaccines, immunotherapy, or chemotherapy methods. Performs genetic engineering work with pathogens of human and animal diseases, and also studies the effect of modified bioagents in aerosol chambers, thus simulating conditions of their combat use. 1.4. Modern biological research areas in the United States, ongoing military-related applied projects. There's every reason to believe that after ratification of the BTWC in 1975, the United States not only failed to stop activities in the area of biological weapons, but rather intensified them under the guise of biosafety programs. For example, in 2001, a model of a cluster bomb for BCA delivery was tested within the framework of the CIA project Clear Vision. For a number of years, weapon-grade anthrax pathogens have been produced, ostensibly to test diagnostic equipment and to develop means of protection against biological weapons. Project Jefferson was initiated to create a genetically modified strain of anthrax, similar to the one created by Soviet scientists, as believed by the United States. Under the auspices of DTRA, Project Bacchus also implemented, under which a production facility was built on a test site in the Nevada desert using publicly available biotechnological equipment. The possibility of creating BCA, for example, by terrorists was allegedly tested at this production facility. Moreover, manifestations characterizing specific features of such a facility and methods of its detection were evaluated. The existence in the United States of programs that can be offensive in nature is confirmed by publications of Eckhard Wimmer in 2002 on the artificial synthesis of poliomyelitis, Craig Venter in the field of genomics and synthetic biology, as well as modification of the mouse pox virus, which has 100% destructive power. It should be noted that the United States pays special attention to synthetic biology. It allows creating microorganisms with specified properties that do not exist in nature with the help of streamlined synthesis methods in small laboratories equipped with special equipment. And I just keep thinking in my mind, Lyme disease, Lyme disease, Lyme disease. It is impossible to identify the true direction of such work even at the stage of production of the final product without an intrusive inspection of a facility, since input raw materials for the synthesis may not belong to controlled materials category. An important feature of synthesized microorganisms is that their structure and consequently properties are known only to developers. It is extremely difficult to detect and identify them in real time, as well as to provide the necessary assistance in case of damage in timely manner. A special working group was established within the framework of the Pentagon Scientific and Technical Advisory Council in order to explore possibilities of applying biosynthetic methods for military purposes in the United States. The United States received the most significant results of dual-use research related to the modification of cellular and molecular structures of living organisms. Specifically, in 2006, a genetic modification of a virus capable of causing an epidemic of avian influenza. Do you guys remember that? Avian flu? In humans was synthesized in the United States at the end of 2008 based on a combination of 3 genes for the causative agent of the Spanish flu. Remember the Spanish flu? No, well, we weren't alive, but yeah, I mean, that was like the last massive pandemic. A virus was obtained that can penetrate into human lungs as well as produce an enzyme necessary for its reproduction. The Pentagon is actively investing billions of dollars in synthetic biology. The majority of studies has a confidential nature. There are a number of projects among them, which are implemented by dedicated research organizations, including within the framework of the JASON project. Special attention to programs in the area of synthetic biology is paid by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and that makes sense because they're the ones doing the chemtrailing. And this is according to RFK Jr. and many others, which in 2014 established the Biological Technologies Office, the BTO, responsible for basic and applied research in the field of gene editing, synthetic biology, and other emerging biotechnologies. And I believe this is exactly what chemtrails are. Chemtrails, gene editing, synthetic biology, and other emerging biotechnologies. And I say this because I have analyzed water sample after water sample after water sample, and I have found heavy metals and parasites and other things that I have no clue what they are. God only knows. And of course, U.S. scientists. The work of this office is focused on using achievements of engineering sciences and information technology to improve the biotechnological capacity of the U.S. Army, ensuring its technological advantage. Currently, DARPA is implementing more than 45 programs, of which 14 are aimed at using achievements of synthetic biology, including such projects as Detect It with gene editing technologies, DiGET, Living Foundries, Safe Genes. According to a number of and we know who was obsessed with genetics, the Trilateral Commission, Jeffrey Epstein, right? We know this from his files. According to a number of experts, a typical example of the military orientation is the research conducted at the Erasmus Medical Center, and this is the Kingdom of Netherlands, and at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. and financed by funds coming from the United States. In 2012, scientists at these institutions announced the breeding of a new variety of the avian influenza that can be transmitted between humans by airborne infection. At the University of Pennsylvania, studies of artificially synthesized smallpox virus were conducted, ostensibly in order to explore this pathogen at a qualitative new level compared to how it was done with the smallpox virus before its official elimination in 1980. Professionals from the United States and Japan have developed a technology for the artificial synthesis of specified modifications of dangerous viruses and a method for selecting among them the most deadly pathogens that have the ability to be rapidly transmitted from person to person. Synthesized microorganisms are tested on laboratory animals that are closest to humans in structure of the immune system: ferrets, monkeys. The most dangerous experiments are carried out in laboratories of the 4th level of biological safety. Again, Argentina, Hanta virus. Some experts argue that in 5 to 7 years, the United States will be able to synthesize any biological agent with specified properties. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency of the United Department of Defense has also initiated the Insect Allies Project in order to access the feasibility of using various insect species to spread genetically modified viruses. Friends, they are planning on releasing more genetically modified mosquitoes in Miami and California. They may be releasing them as we speak, and God only knows where else they're doing this. Despite assurances of the U.S. side concerning the peaceful, protective purpose of these works, experiments from the University of Montpellier and Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Biology and the University of Freiburg recorded features of a program to create a new type of biological warfare in such works. It was noted that an effective way of introducing genetically modified viruses into plants, almost any crop species, through insects in order to destroy crops was actually being studied. Obviously, this type of warfare could also be used against humans and farm animals using blood-sucking insects, such as mosquitoes. Y'all gonna have to walk around with, like, beekeeper costumes. Y'all gonna walk around with netting. What am I saying? You all? We all. In this context, the patent issued by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, dated March 3rd, 2015, number 8967029B1, for an aerial drone for the spread of infected mosquitoes in the air is of particular relevance. The patent description states that with the help of this device, enemy troops can be destroyed or disabled without any risk to U.S. military personnel. It is characterized by low unit cost, rapid destructive effect, and no need for contact with enemy manpower. This is in line with the U.S. concept of contactless warfare. The possibility of equipping capsules with toxic, radioactive, narcotic substances, as well as pathogens of infectious diseases, has been demonstrated, and they are now doing this on the micro level because they have actually nanobots that have capsules that contain radiation, cells, so that they can move around inside the body. You can't even imagine what they have now. The development of such munitions, which do not belong to the list of conventional weapons and the nomenclature of humane means of warfare in accordance with the norms of international humanitarian law, in fact, violates U.S. obligations under the BTWC and UN Security Council Resolution number 1540. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation provided the Commission with a copy of an inquiry to the United States Department of State, dispatched in 2018, requesting a legal assessment of the development of such technical devices from the standpoint of compliance with the BTWC. In response to this inquiry, the U.S. administration limited itself to a formal reply without substance, cynically thanking the Russian side for drawing attention to this issue and pointing out that, and I quote, the development and production of biological and chemical weapons are prohibited by national legislation. However, the decision to issue a patent does not violate U.S. obligations under the BTWC and the CWC. End quote. Another equally noteworthy U.S. patent dated August 5th, 2014, number 8794155B1, concerns hollow point ammunition for firearms containing toxic substances or bioagents. A capsule with poison or infectious agent is inserted into the cartridge. Even if the gunshot wound is not fatal, the person struck with such ammunition must die, either as a result of the effect of poison or as a result of the development of infection, in the latter case being also a source of infection of other people. These inventions fall under the ban under the BTWC Article 1, which indicates a direct violation by the United States of its obligations under this convention. 1.5. Changing tactics for dual-use biological research. The most sensitive biological research of a military applied nature has been transferred to top-secret facilities in the United States. Americans carry out genetic engineering work. There are causative agents of such dangerous infectious diseases as anthrax, plague, tularemia, botulism, and others. The properties of potential BCA, including pathogens of especially pathogenic viruses or hemorrhagic fevers, are explored. Effects of modified agents in aerosol chambers are studied, thus simulating conditions of their combat use. In the United States, much of the dual-use biological research is conducted by civilian ministries and agencies, as well as by private companies. Moreover, many works have been removed from the protective category and declared anti-terrorist, which makes it possible to avoid providing information about them within the framework of the BTWC confidence building measures. Such an approach also makes it possible to completely eliminate not only the conduct of international inspections, but also the control of biological activities at the national level. The United States establishes biological laboratories under its control outside the national territory, which allows them to solve several tasks at once. First, such approach opens up the possibility of conducting genetic and other biological experiments on humans in such facilities without concern regarding any protests of the American public and any consequences of violating their national legislation. Second, by using foreign biological facilities, the United States can collect and study pathogens that can infect a specific genotype of humans, animals, and plants. At the same time, U.S. experts have the opportunity to study dissemination and behavior of these microorganisms in real climatic conditions in order to adjust their properties. Third, the United States can test biological agents of interest on the ground, exploring their pathogenicity, virulence, possible delivery routes to the target, and other properties in the field of potential use. Fourth, U.S. professionals following instructions and acting under the control of the U.S. Department of Defense are exported previously collected, especially dangerous pathogenic microorganisms, in particular cholera, anthrax, tularemia, and genetic material using diplomatic channels for further work at the Pentagon's secret closed facilities, which allows them to escape from any forms of public and international control in countries where biological laboratories are located. This represents one of the most obvious signs of dangerous U.S. activities in Ukraine. However, such transboundary movements of pathogens are not controlled by the World Health Organization. The BTWC, or other international institutions. Documents available to the Commission confirm numerous cases of transfer abroad from Ukraine of human tissue samples and blood serum, as well as dangerous pathogens and their carriers. It is known that the United States and its allies managed to export at least 16,000 biological samples outside Ukraine, which creates risks of transmitting sensitive genetic information abroad, as well as threats to biological safety, not only for Ukraine, but also for all regions from which the samples were transferred. Fifth, the United States conducts studies of especially dangerous pathogenic microorganisms that have natural foci within countries of interest to the United States, and the use of which can be disguised as natural outbreaks of infectious disease. Therefore, the United States is implementing a strategy to ensure a military biological presence through a network of laboratories under its control outside the national territory for purposes that are of a particularly dangerous nature, hidden from public control and reporting. 1.6. Model of implementation of Pentagon medical and biological activities outside the national territory. The United States is creating a global military biological network, effectively using other countries as a testing ground for military biological tests. As a result, millions of people living in these countries unwittingly become hostages to deadly biological threats posed by the United States. And I keep thinking Ebola. Remember when there was that Ebola outbreak? U.S. biological facilities are funded by the DTRA military entity within the framework of the Cooperative Biological Engagement Program and are located in the former Soviet republics, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Africa. The global plan for military biological development of countries of the world involves not only the Pentagon and the U.S. Special Services, but also their controlled or affiliated corporations and structures. You know, I stand corrected, friends. The full report looks like it's 117 pages. Oh my Lord. They're right, man. We are the greater Satan. I'd also like to note that Vladimir Alexeyev, well, it says here he's a Russian lieutenant general. He's actually a Ukrainian Russian lieutenant general, known to have intelligence connections to paramilitary groups around the world. Now, there was an attempted assassination, they believe, by the Ukrainian government. Let's find out what Trump has to say about the current situation with Iran.
Thanks for joining us for your streaming news at 12:30. I'm Cheryl Mercedes. President Trump says the economy will get better as soon as the conflict with Iran comes to an end. But the peace process is moving slower than he would like. Natalie Brand has those details from the White House.
President Trump has warned Iran that the clock is ticking to make a deal. He posted on social media Sunday, better get moving fast or there won't be anything left of them. Some of the president's allies say more military strikes are needed.
Hurt them more, maybe they'll make a deal if you hurt them enough. But right now, I think they're trying to wait us out. I think they're playing games.
Pakistan, which is mediating negotiations, dispatched its interior minister to Tehran Monday. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman insisted the talks are focused on ending the war and wants the U.S. to recognize its right to nuclear enrichment, something President Trump has repeatedly called a deal breaker.
The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon.
The longer the conflict goes on, the more Americans say they're impacted by rising prices, and that's dragging down President Trump's approval rating. In a new CBS News poll, 7 out of 10 surveyed say they're frustrated or even angry about President Trump's approach to the economy. 2/3 say his policies are making it worse in the short term, and 77% say incomes aren't keeping up with inflation.
Donald Trump was the candidate who said he was going to keep us out of wars and he was going to focus on bringing down prices. And of course, he's done just the opposite.
And we all know, I think now, that Donald Trump is a liar, just like every other president, going back, oh my good Lord, we don't even know how far, 100+ years. And we also know that Iran doesn't take Trump seriously. And to be honest with you, I don't know why anybody would. So we covered the U.S. government's 2 foreign wars, but we still need to talk about the Bilderberg Group and NASA and the secret, silent war that the United States government has waged on the American citizens. We'll cover that in part 2. Have a wonderful evening. Please continue to pray. Pray for Tulsi. Pray for the peacekeepers. And pray for our soldiers. Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.